is Claudine Gay. Until recently, she was president of Harvard University. You may remember her from her embarrassing showing at the Congressional anti-Semitism hearings, or from her more recent plagiarism scandal. Or you may have seen the mainstream media's pathetic attempts to cover for her plagiarism by calling it a right-wing weapon and racism. Since when did academic integrity and imposing anti-Semitism become things that only conservatives care about? And why is it that the media and the Harvard board have bent over backwards to shield Claudine Gay from the consequences of her own actions? Let's be clear. Claudine Gay deserved to lose her position. She presided over one of the worst campus scandals in recent memory. Her troubles began right after October 7th, the Hamas invasion of Israel and the most brutal attack against the Jews since the Holocaust. Like other progressive colleges, Harvard quickly became a hotbed for anti-Semitism. The school was accused of giving cover to student protests that in no uncertain terms called for the destruction of Israel and its people. Before Israel had even buried its dead, a coalition of 34 Harvard student associations released an ugly statement in support of Hamas that read, "We, the undersigned student organizations, hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all the unfolding violence." The statement received massive backlash. Some Jewish mega-donors withdrew their funds, and over 1,600 Harvard alumni threatened to withdraw their contributions over the school's blasé attitude toward anti-Semitism. Alongside presidents of UPenn and MIT, Claudine Gay was called into Congress to testify about allegations that the school was harboring hatred of Jews. Then began the real showdown.
Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Around the time of Gay's viral and morally indifferent remark, journalists Chris Rufo, Chris Brunette, and Aaron Sibarium said that they had uncovered an incident of plagiarism in her past scholarship. Then they found more. About 50 more. Gay allegedly plagiarized many parts of her dissertation, according to Rufo's evidence. All of this obviously violated Harvard's academic code of conduct. This was a level of plagiarism that any student would have been penalized or expelled for. Double standard much? Outright copying another person's work without attribution could just be laziness, but in Gay's case, it was more likely intellectual mediocrity. For the president of the world's supposedly supreme college, Gay had little to show for it. Over about 20 years, she wrote 10 journal articles and no books, about half the average rate for a political science professor, according to the Heritage Foundation. Meanwhile, in the same time span, a recent president of UPenn, also a political science professor, Amy Gutman, published over 100 articles and over a dozen books. In other words, Gay failed to produce the quantity and quality of work that would merit her stewarding Harvard, and she allegedly cheated on papers. So, how did she get this job? Gay received her PhD from Harvard in 1998 with the dissertation that allegedly was just plagiarized before going on to work as a professor at Stanford for several years. She then returned to Harvard as a faculty member in 2006. She quietly rose up the ranks to become dean of Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Upon the retirement of the previous president, Gay was announced as his successor in December of 2022. She was picked over more than 600 other candidates. As the first Black president of Harvard, her appointment was hailed as a victory for diversity that would advance strategies of inclusion. Her peers thought of her as a transformative figure that would upend Harvard into an anti-racist institution. During a subsequent Q&A session with reporters, when asked what Harvard would do if the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in admissions, Gay said, "We will continue to champion the value of diversity. irrespective of how the landscape around that might change. Gay also said that Harvard would adopt recommendations from the Harvard and Legacy of Slavery report, and that this would create, quote, an opportunity for reckoning and repair. So Gay is a fixture of the diversity, equity, and inclusion machine that rules America's universities today. Under this system, as a minority, you are mostly immune from criticism and not held to the same standard of excellence as non-minorities. Because you check a box. Merit then no longer matters as much as it once did at Harvard. This is discrimination and racism, plain and simple. And Gay clung on to DEI until the bitter end. She resigned, finally, but not without a fight. In her exit letter, she accused her critics of, you guessed it, racism in their lobbying for her ouster. Critical race theory proponent and now disgraced former head of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research, Ibram X. Kendi, backed up Gay, unsurprisingly. He said that Gay would have never been investigated and targeted if Gay were white. But how could Gay be forced out because of racism? UPenn President Liz McGill, who was white, stepped down immediately after her bad testimony for Congress, and she didn't even commit plagiarism. She simply just admitted she didn't do a good job in front of Congress. And McGill was in the same room as Gay on that day. They both had lame answers when asked what they were doing to combat rampant anti-Semitism on their campuses. Yet Gay got to keep her job for many weeks longer. And the funny part is, Gay wasn't even kicked out. She resigned, but only to become a tenured professor again with the same salary as before, a whopping $900,000. Have fun explaining to your colleagues why you earn hundreds of thousands of dollars more than them, Claudine. So now she's getting paid the same for doing way less work. Yeah, it really sounds like white supremacy. For a month, the mainstream media tirelessly defended Gay. Some outlets redefined the meaning of plagiarism to excuse what she did. The Harvard Corporation, which owns the school, also tried to protect Gay. In a statement, it said it had found examples of, quote, duplicative language without appropriate attribution in Gay's dissertation. I think there's a better word for that. Harvard has commanded higher education for forever. It's America's oldest and perhaps most prestigious university. It's also the wealthiest in the world with an endowment of over $50 billion. And with an undergrad acceptance rate of just 3%, Harvard is extremely exclusive. It promises a state-of-the-art education, and its legacy includes Mark Zuckerberg and multiple presidents. For a long time, Harvard probably thought itself invincible. Though increasingly radical and woke, Harvard could afford to be, because the money never stopped pouring in. But now, its DEI regime appears to be crumbling. Harvard's donors are fleeing. Jewish students are considering not applying. All because Harvard refused to denounce anti-Semitism on its campus. The bare minimum, really. If you want to know why we think Israel's only path forward is to occupy Gaza entirely, click here.